A cold gust of wind swept through the dimly lit gas station as Emily pulled her coat tighter around her growing belly. She stood beside the worn-out car she had borrowed from a neighbor, the hood propped open as steam hissed from the overheated engine. Her hands trembled, partly from the bitter night air, partly from exhaustion. It had been days since she had eaten a proper meal, and the weight of her unborn child pressed heavily on her tired body. She never imagined her life would come to this, alone, stranded in an unfamiliar town, with barely a few dollars in her pocket. Just weeks ago, she had a home, a job, and a man she loved. But when she told her boyfriend she was pregnant, his reaction was colder than she ever could have expected. He left. No warning, no explanation, just vanished, as if she never meant anything to him. The shock of abandonment had numbed her at first, but as the days passed, reality hit harder. She was alone in this world now. Her fingers fumbled with her phone, desperately searching for a way out of her situation. But the battery was dead. Of course. Just her luck. She sighed, resting her hand on her stomach, whispering softly, "I promise I'll take care of you, no matter what." The faint sound of an approaching car made her turn. Headlights pierced through the darkness, illuminating the empty lot. A sleek black sports car rolled into the station, its engine humming smoothly. A stark contrast to the sputtering wreck she stood beside. Emily barely paid attention at first, too focused on her own troubles. But when the driver stepped out, she noticed something odd. The man, well-dressed and clearly wealthy, looked irritated as he examined the front of his car. He crouched down, inspecting something near the bumper, muttering under his breath. It wasn't just any car problem, a flat tire. For a moment, Emily hesitated. She had learned a thing or two about cars from her late father, who had been a mechanic all his life. It wasn't much, but it was enough to fix something like that. And right now, she needed every opportunity she could find. Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward, clearing her throat. "Excuse me, sir. Do you need help with that?" The man looked up, his sharp blue eyes scanning her before settling on her belly. There was a flicker of hesitation in his expression, as if he wasn't sure whether to take her seriously. He was clearly used to people offering their services for money. But Emily wasn't just looking for charity. She needed a chance. "I appreciate the offer, but I don't think this is something you should be worrying about," he said, his voice polite but distant. Emily swallowed her pride. "I know how to fix it. My dad was a mechanic." He raised an eyebrow, still unconvinced. "You work with cars?" She nodded. "Not professionally, but I've changed tires more times than I can count." He glanced at his watch, clearly in a hurry. With a sigh, he stepped aside. "All right, if you think you can do it, go ahead." Emily wasted no time. She grabbed the jack from the car's trunk, her fingers moving swiftly despite the biting cold. Her body ached from fatigue, but she forced herself to focus. Within minutes, she had loosened the bolts and swapped out the damaged tire for the spare. She barely noticed the man watching her, arms crossed, an unreadable expression on his face. When she finished, she stood up, wiping her hands on her coat. "There, you're good to go." The man nodded, seemingly impressed. He reached into his wallet, pulling out a crisp $100 bill. "Here, for your trouble." Emily hesitated. The money would help, no doubt about that. But something about taking it felt wrong. She wasn't looking for a handout. She wanted work, a chance to stand on her own feet. I don't want money," she said finally. "I just need a job. Anything. I can clean, fix things. Whatever you need." The man looked at her, really looked at her this time. There was something in his gaze, curiosity, maybe even respect. Most people would have taken the cash and walked away, but she didn't. That alone made her different. "What's your name?" he asked. "Emily." He paused, considering something. Then, after what felt like an eternity, he reached into his pocket, pulling out a business card. "I'm Daniel Carter. I own a few auto shops in the city. If you're serious about working, come by tomorrow." Emily's breath caught in her throat. Was this real, or was she dreaming? She took the card with shaking fingers, staring at the printed name. Daniel Carter, a name she had heard before. A millionaire, a businessman, someone completely out of her world. She looked up at him, trying to find the right words. "Thank you." Daniel nodded, but didn't say anything else. He simply got back into his car, the engine purring as he pulled out of the station. Emily stood there, staring after him, the card clutched tightly in her hand. For the first time in weeks, she felt something she hadn't dared to hope for. A chance. But she had no idea that this simple act, repairing a millionaire's car, would change her life forever. Emily sat on the edge of the small motel bed, staring at the business card in her hands. The bold letters spelling out Daniel Carter almost felt unreal. She had spent weeks struggling, feeling like the world had abandoned her, and now, in a random gas station, she had met a man who might hold the key to a new beginning. But was it really that simple? She traced her fingers over the card, deep in thought. A millionaire like Daniel had no reason to help someone like her. Maybe he had just been polite, offering the job out of obligation rather than real intention. What if she showed up tomorrow and he didn't remember her? What if he changed his mind? Doubt gnawed at her, but she shook it off. This was the first opportunity she had been given in a long time. She couldn't afford to let fear stop her now. The next morning, Emily arrived at the auto shop Daniel had mentioned. The place was bigger than she expected. A sleek glass building, standing out among the smaller garages nearby. The moment she stepped inside, the smell of grease and engine oil hit her. Oddly familiar, oddly comforting. A man behind the counter glanced up. "Can I help you?" Emily hesitated. I'm looking for Daniel Carter. He told me to come here." The man raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. "You got an appointment?" Before she could answer, a familiar voice cut through the room. "It's fine, Jake. She's here for me." Emily turned to see Daniel, stepping out from one of the back offices, dressed in a tailored suit, looking just as put together as he had the night before. But there was something different about his expression. Curiosity, maybe even a hint of amusement. Jake gave her a look before shrugging. "All right, your call, boss." Daniel motioned for Emily to follow him. She trailed behind as he led her to a quieter part of the shop, away from the noise of machinery. "So," he said, leaning against a workbench. "You actually showed up." Emily nodded. "I meant what I said. I need a job." Daniel studied her, his sharp blue eyes unreadable. "I'm going to be honest with you, Emily. I don't usually hire people off the street, but there's something about you. You're not just looking for work. You're looking for a way out of something." Her throat tightened, but she forced herself to stay calm. "I just want to stand on my own feet." He considered her words for a moment, then finally sighed. "All right, I'll give you a chance. It won't be easy, and I won't go easy on you just because you're pregnant. I don't expect you to." Daniel smirked slightly, as if impressed by her determination. "Then let's see what you've got." Over the next few weeks, Emily threw herself into the job. It wasn't glamorous. Most of her tasks involved cleaning up, organizing tools, and doing minor repairs. But she didn't complain. She worked harder than anyone expected, proving herself with every task. Slowly, the other workers who had doubted her began to respect her. Even Jake, who had been skeptical at first, started warming up to her. But the more time she spent at the shop, the more she noticed something strange about Daniel. He was successful, no doubt about that, but there was something guarded about him. He never spoke about his personal life. Never let anyone get too close. He kept a strict line between himself and the people who worked for him. One night, as Emily was locking up, she saw him standing outside his office, staring at an old photograph in his hands. His usual confident expression was gone, replaced by something she hadn't seen before: sadness. She hesitated before stepping forward. "Daniel," he glanced up, slipping the photo into his pocket. "Didn't realize you were still here." "I was just finishing up," she said, eyeing him carefully. "Are you okay?" Daniel let out a short laugh, shaking his head. "You don't have to worry about me, Emily." But something about the way he said it told her there was more to the story. As weeks passed, Emily started piecing things together. Daniel wasn't just a wealthy businessman. He had built his success from nothing. People in the shop whispered about his past, about how he had once struggled, how he had lost someone important to him. But no one knew the full story, and Daniel never talked about it. Then, one evening, everything changed. Emily was walking home from the shop when she noticed a black car parked on the street, its engine running. Something about it made her uneasy. As she passed, the window rolled down and a voice called out, "Emily!" She froze. The voice was familiar, too familiar. Slowly she turned, and her heart dropped. Sitting in the car, smirking at her, was the last person she ever wanted to see, her ex-boyfriend, the man who had abandoned her. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. "You didn't think I'd find you, did you?" he said, his voice dripping with amusement. Emily took a step back, instinctively wrapping her arms around her stomach. "What do you want?" He leaned forward, resting his arm on the window. "I heard you've been doing well for yourself. Working for a millionaire, huh? That's quite an upgrade." Her stomach churned. How did he know? Had he been watching her? She clenched her fists. "Leave me alone." But he only chuckled. "Oh, come on, Emily. We've got unfinished business. You think you can just run away and start over? It's not that simple." Fear crawled up her spine. She had worked so hard to escape her past, to build a new life, but now it was coming back to haunt her, and she had no idea what he wanted, or how far he was willing to go to get it. Emily's heart pounded. As she stepped back, her ex-boyfriend's smirk sending a chill down her spine. She had spent weeks trying to move on, trying to build a future for herself and her unborn child. And now, just when things were starting to fall into place, he was here. She clenched her fists, forcing herself to stay calm. "I don't owe you anything. Just leave." But he didn't move. He just leaned on the car door, his eyes scanning her, as if trying to read her. "You're acting like I'm the bad guy here," he said, shaking his head. "Come on, Emily. I made a mistake. All right, I got scared, but I've been thinking, maybe we can work things out." She almost laughed. "Work things out? You walked away the second I told you I was pregnant. You left me with nothing. And now, because I've found a way to survive without you, you suddenly care." His jaw tightened, his smirk fading. "You're making this sound worse than it is. I didn't know what to do back then, but I've changed." Emily didn't believe him. There was something in his voice, something rehearsed, and then it hit her. He wasn't here because he cared. He was here because he had seen her with Daniel. He saw an opportunity. "You heard I work for a millionaire, and now you want back in," she said, her voice steady. For a moment, he didn't respond, but the flicker of annoyance in his eyes told her she was right. "I don't have time for this," she said, turning away. But before she could take another step, his hand shot out, grabbing her wrist. Not hard, but firm enough to make her stop. "You don't get to just walk away from me," he said, his voice low. A wave of panic surged through her, but before she could react, another voice cut through the tension. I think she just did. Emily turned, and there was Daniel, standing just a few feet away. His expression was calm, but his eyes were sharp, locked onto her ex-boyfriend, like a silent warning. Her ex let go immediately, raising his hands in mock innocence. Relax, man. We were just talking. Daniel took a step closer. No, you weren't. Emily had never seen him like this before. The usually composed, distant businessman now stood with a quiet intensity, his presence alone enough to make her ex shift uncomfortably. You should leave, Daniel said simply. Her ex chuckled, shaking his head. This isn't over. But this time, there was uncertainty in his voice. He hesitated for a moment before slipping back into his car and, driving away, Emily exhaled shakily, her whole body still tense. She hadn't realized how much fear she had been carrying until now. You okay? Daniel asked. She nodded, even though her hands were still shaking. I will be. Daniel watched the car disappear into the distance before turning back to her. Come on, I'll walk you home. As they walked in silence, Emily couldn't stop thinking about what just happened. She had spent so much time believing she was alone, that she had to fight every battle on her own. But tonight, for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel alone. When they reached her apartment building, she turned to him. Thank you. Daniel shrugged. You don't have to thank me. But she did. He had done more for her than he realized. He had given her a job, a chance, and now he had shown her that she didn't have to face everything by herself. For the first time in weeks, she felt safe. The next morning, she walked into the shop with a new sense of confidence. She wasn't running anymore. She wasn't afraid. And when Daniel saw her, he didn't say anything, just gave her a small nod, as if he already knew. Emily smiled. She had found something she never thought she would again, a future.